In this presentation, we will create adjusting journal entry reports and reversing journal entry reports. In other words, we have entered the adjusting journal entries and the reversing journal entries. Now we want to be creating reports that will show just the adjusting and reversing journal entries. We will also create the balance sheet and income statement as of the month end type of reports after having finished the adjusting and reversing entries. We will enter this into QuickBooks Pro 2020, QuickBooks Desktop 2020. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We currently have the Open Windows open. You can open the Open Windows by selecting the View dropdown and the Open Windows list. We've already entered the adjusting entries. Now we're thinking about how can we generate the reports related to them. Remember that the adjusting entries might be something that's done by a separate department or a separate CPA firm, possibly part of tax preparation or year-end review or adjusting entries for a separate CPA firm to do for a company file. If that is then the case, it could even be possible that the CPA firm is using a backup file in order to do the review process, compilation, financial statements, audit, or the tax preparation. They may then enter their adjusting entries in order to do that process, may then want to provide those adjusting entries to the client so that they can enter them into their system. So we might want to then run a report to print these adjusting entries so that they can then be given to the client and put into the system. We want to make that report as clear as possible because these entries can be a little bit confusing, and obviously we want to make it clear or easy for the client to then be able to enter that into their system. We also might just want to give the adjusting entries and say, hey, these are our adjustments. If you have any questions about them, if they're causing you any problems within the system, please let us know. We tried to do the adjusting entry and then the reversing entries for them to put you right back into the normal type of system that you would do that works logistically well. Your system's working great logistically well. We just had to do this to make the tweaks to get it to an adjusting entry, then reverse what needed to be reversed out to put it back to the normal system. So we want to be able to run those reports. Let's first take a look at the balance sheet and the financials and the income statement after having entered the adjustments. We're going to go to the reports up top. We're going to go to the company and financial. First, take a look at the balance sheet. We're going to be taking a look at the balance sheet as of the end of the period, which is going to be 02/28/20. Actually, one more day, 02/29/20. And here is our balance sheet. So we're first going to basically package this together as we have done in the past. We'll export this to Excel. Then we will save it as a PDF file. We'll then take the Excel documents and make one long PDF file with all the information within it. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to the Excel file here. We're going to create a new worksheet. We will create a new worksheet. And then we will also create a new workbook. So that's the one we want, and export. Here is our file. The typical strategy we'll go through here. We'll delete the first tab. We're going to do this multiple times. I right click on it, delete it. And then we will typically I'll go to the page layout, and that'll give us a pop-up saying, and that'll help us to see the splits that are put in place. I'm going to go to the View tab up top, Windows, and then remove the splits. And then I'm going to go down here to the double click on the sheet, and I'm going to call this balance sheet for February. And then I'll click off of it. You could delete this information or format it if you would so choose as well. We'll then go back to the normal screen, and then I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to the File tab. We're going to go to Save As. We're going to go to Browse, and then I'm going to go to my desktop where I have all of this stored. We want to go into the Get Great Guitars file. We're then going to say that this is going to be section 10. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new section. This is going to be section 10. And within section 10, we're going to put this information. So, and I'm going to call it then the financial statements. Let's call it financial statements for February. And this is after the adjusting entry. So we'll save that. And I'm going to say yes. And then we'll close this back out. I'll also save it as a PDF file by going to the print. You could print here, save it as a PDF file. I'll use the Qt PDF printer just to practice that. So it's going to the Qt PDF printer. We're going to say print, and then it'll give us the printing dialog box. Here it is. Let's go ahead and save it. I'm going to see where I want to put it, which is in section 10. And I'm just going to record this as the balance sheet for February. And we'll then say save. And now let's look at the profit and loss. Do the same thing. Going to go to the reports up top. Company and financial. We'll take a look at the profit and loss standard report. We'll change the dates up top. Let's make it just for the month of February this time. 02/01/20 to 02/29/20. So here is the month of February only, not January and February, but just February. And so then we're going to export this report as well. So we're going to go to Excel. We're going to create a new worksheet, but this time we're going to put it into the existing workbook. And here's where it's going right now. I'm going to click on the Browse button. We're going to find the correct location, which is in the Get Great Guitars file. We're going to go into section 10. We're going to go into the financial statements for February. We'll then export this item. Now note that you got to think about what you want to do in different months here, because you could create another profit and loss for January and February. You can have a comparative profit and loss. So you want to think about how are you going to package this thing up if you're giving it to a supervisor and or to a client. Do you want a lot of reports that'll make it possibly look more impressive or whatnot? Or do you want to make it more simplified and easy to read? Do you want just the current month that you did in order to show the work? Or do you want the summary reports? So you got to work that out and think about how you're going to present this stuff. So we're just going to report this one. We're going to say that the QuickBooks, I'm going to right click and delete this tab. I'm going to pull this sheet to the right. Then I'm going to go to the layout group and say OK. And then up top, I'm going to go to we will go to the View tab up top. We'll go to the Windows and we'll select the Split to unsplit the panes. I'm going to go ahead and delete these items that are not needed. And then we'll rename it down here. We're going to call this the P and L for February. P and L. And then I'm going to go back to the normal view. And then we'll close this one back out. We'll save the changes that have been made and say yes, okay. And so there's going to be the profit and loss. Now we're going to get into the new reports, which are going to be the journal reports. We're going to show the journal entries. This is what we've did. We're going to say, hey, this is what has happened. This is what we have done with the adjusting process. We're going to, and note this is also important too, because if you give the adjusting journal entries, often make the net income lower because of the adjusting entry, which could make clients happy or sad, depending on if they're thinking about it in terms of taxes, which would make them happy. If the net income was lower, they'd pay less taxes possibly, or sad if they needed to look good in order to get investments or a loan or something like that. So we want to be able to explain that too. And to do that, we'll have to go to the adjusting entry report. So we're going to go to the reports drop down. We are going to go to the accounting and taxes, and we have to see this in terms of basically journal entries. So we're going to go to the journal. So we're going to open up the journal and say, okay. So there is the journal. Now we only need the journal as of the last day of the year, because that's when we entered our adjusting entries as of. And I may have accidentally put some in there as of the 28th instead of all the 29th. Because of 28 or 29 days in February. Therefore, I'm going to run this for 2 days just to catch that issue if that's the case. I'm going to say this is going to be as of 02/28/20 to 02/29/20. So the last 2 days, and here's going to be all the transactions basically that we had for those last 2 days. Notice the ones we're looking for are the adjusting entries. So we have other type of transactions that are happening here, and it's showing the debits and credits basically for all the transactions that are taking place. But what we want is the adjusting journal entries. So typically those should be all the transactions that are down here in terms of a journal. So here's the journals. All of our adjusting entries will be in the format of the journals. So we have a journal down here. We have a journal down here. And hopefully we put in the memo for the journals that are the adjusting journal entries that they have the adjusting journal entry here. So we can go back down, and the adjusting journal entries are these items. So it looks like most of them are in the 29th. So that looks good. We're then going to filter this so that we get just the journals. We're going to filter it by type so that we can get all the stuff that aren't journals, and we can at least filter it down to that. It might not get rid of everything else, but we can at least filter this down more to just the adjusting journal entries by filtering by type. So we're going to go to the customized reports up top. We're going to go to the filters, and then we want to scroll down. Now it's a little bit confusing because over here it says type, and so we're choosing the fields on this side, but if you scroll down, it doesn't say type, it says transaction type. Same thing. So we got to say transaction type. And then what we want is the transaction type. Again, it's a little confusing because here it says the general journal, but when you go to the transaction type, we're looking for just the journal. They just call it journal here to shorten it. So now they shortened it on this side. So we're looking for the journal right here. So we're going to say the journal, and that's the one. So we're going to filter it just by the type. Then we'll say OK. And so now it has been filtered by type. Now, if we go through this, note that not all of it might not all be just as of the adjusting entries, because we still have anything that doesn't have a driving form to it. You'll recall QuickBooks will then create a general journal for. So, for example, this transactions with the office furniture, it created a general journal for, not because it's an adjusting journal entry, but because that's just, there's no other default form to use, and therefore the system had to use that. This is the payroll expense, which we entered with an adjusting journal entry. And then we have the adjusting entry here. Now this is an adjusting entry. We could change the date to the 29th on these. So that's actually what I'll do here. Let's go into these items and actually make them all as of the 29th. And that could help us to differentiate that further. That's what they should be in there as of in any case. So I'm going to double click on this item. I'm going to make the date one day up, the 29th, and then enter and yes, closing this back out. So that should now be on the 29th. And then this transaction, once again, it's an adjusting journal entry. As you can see here, I'm going to change the date to the 29th. So if I double click on that, change the date to the 29th and record and say yes, closing this back out. Then this is an adjusting journal entry. I'll make that as of the 29th, double clicking on it. And we'll change the date to the 29th there. Once again, closing this back out, saying yes. All right, and then this one, also an adjusting entry, should be the 29th. I'm going to double click on it. We'll change the date to the 29th for the first item. So this one's going to be the 29th. So we'll go into the adjusting entry here and say 29th. I had to double click on that to go to the adjusting entry. So I'm going to close this back out and say yes. And I had to just double click on this item to make it an adjusting entry. Closing this back out. So then we have the 29th, the 29th. Now all the adjusting entries appear to be in the 29th. So let's restrict this a little bit more, making this the 29th to the 29th, just one day. And then we should have just basically our adjusting entries. Again, it might not be perfect all the time. That might not be the case because you might have some other transaction that happened to be an adjusting entry here. But this will clean it out pretty good. And then what you can do, if they're not all filtered out, you can try to use the filtering options more, or you can export it to Excel and just simply delete the transactions that are not adjusting journal entries in that format as well. Okay, so we're going to do our same process here. And just to review this, notice what we have here. We've got the type is going to be a journal entry. The date is 2/29. We've got the number. We've got the name, which would only apply when we had to put one in, which would typically be when accounts receivable or accounts payable was affected. The memo hopefully says adjusting entry within it, because that'll indicate within the system that this is our adjusting entry. So if someone else sees it, they can say, oh, that's one of those adjusting entries. We'll leave it alone. Hopefully that, that works out. And then we have the accounts that will be affected, and we'll see the debits and credits. So if you're not used to the debits and credits, this might be look a little bit funny to look at, but it'll be in the format of debits and credits, and we kind of have to have that format with basically these adjusting entries, which is, again, another reason it's a little confusing oftentimes if we're giving it back and forth to the accounting process that's usually deals with forms and not debits and credits. So if we have to give this to somebody to enter into their system, and they're not used to using debits and credits, but just to enter the forms in order to enter transactions, then that can be a little intimidating. Therefore, again, we want to make this as clean as possible so that they can just go right into the system and enter it pretty easily. Okay, so we're going to then go ahead and if we review these, obviously we had the loan transaction, the loan transaction, and then we had to adjust between short-term and long-term portion. We had the interest payable for the accrued interest. We had the accounts receivable where we had to pull the invoice into the current time period that was issued after the time period, even though the work was done before it. We had the prepaid insurance that we had to record the amount that had been incurred. We had the depreciation, and we had the unearned revenue adjustments. Let's go ahead and print this now. We're going to go to the print button up top. I'm going to go ahead and print it. I'm going to use the Qt PDF printer in order to do so. We will then say print, and then we'll get our dialog box, the dialog box here, and I'm going to print it as, let's see, we're going to make this a journal. Let's call it adjusting journal entries. And I'm going to say for February, so we have that. Then we'll also export it. So I'm going to go to the Excel, create new worksheet, and then we're going to put it to that existing workbook. So we're going to put this into the existing workbook, browse to make sure we're in the proper place. We are. Therefore, I'm going to select that workbook and export. Here is our sheet. So typically I'll take that, I'm going to left click on it, I'm going to drag it to the right then. I'm going to click on this first one, I'm going to right click on the tab, delete it. Then we'll go back to, I'm going to say delete, we'll go back to the new worksheet. We are now in the new worksheet. We're going to then go to the page layout. So within the page layout group, we're going to say OK. We'll then go up top to the view tab in the page layout. We see the windows here. We're going to unsplit the panes up top, so the panes are now unsplit. You'll see now that we have some formatting issues with it. So typical kind of formatting issues. I'm going to double click down here. I'm going to call it ADJ entries, let's say, for February. And then I'm going to go back to the first tab. And now we're going to think about, well, how can we fix this? Well, again, we can delete those columns that aren't useful. So I can put my cursor here, I can put my cursor here, I'm holding down Control, and all these columns that don't have any content in them, we will just remove them completely. So I'm going to just hold down Control and take all of these columns and remove them. I'm going to then let go of Control, right click on the selected area and delete that. So there we have that. Still doesn't quite do it, therefore I would typically make the page landscape. So to do that, we're going to go to the page layout, we're going to go to the page setup, and we're going to change the orientation from portrait to landscape. Now it all fits on a page, it looks pretty good. And obviously here again, if you had some journal entry that wasn't an adjusting journal entry and you wanted to give this to someone, this is a great tool because now you can just say, okay, I'll just highlight those. If I didn't want these, I could just highlight it, right click, don't do this, but I'm just showing, and delete it. Right? And then I can show it, and then I can say undo, rather than like printing the report and crossing it out or something like that and then giving it to somebody else to say, yeah, they're all adjusting entries except for this crossed out one or something like that, right? You can actually export it to Excel, do any further modifications you need to, like deleting entries that are journal entries but not adjusting entries, and then you can give this to someone in a nice clean type of format, making it, again, as easy as possible for someone else to read, comprehend, and hopefully enter into their system if that's what we're asking them to do. It's not always an easy thing to convince someone to enter. Okay, anyways, so let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to say yes, and then we'll close this back out. And then we didn't save the P&L as a profit and loss as a PDF, so I'm going to go back to the P&L. Let's also save it as a PDF. I'm going to go to print up top, reports. We're then going to save it as a PDF file. Let's go ahead and print that. Then we'll get the dialog box. I'm going to say okay. We're going to call this a profit and loss report. So we'll say this is a profit and loss report, and let's say just February, and save that. Now we have to do our report for the reversing entries. So if we go back to the journal, the reversing entries were done as of the first day of the next month. So I'm going to change the dates up top. I'm just going to say +1, plus. So this is going to be March 1st now that we have our reversing entries. We had to reverse. Now notice not all of the entries are going to be reversed. And it's kind of, it could be a little confusing to know which ones are going to be reversed or not. The ones that you can see are going to cause a problem we need to reverse them. Like the accounts receivable, you can clearly see that if we didn't reverse it, we would have a double entry sometime in March. So we have to reverse it. And then we had the payable, interest payable that we reversed, and the unearned revenue that we reversed to get us back to logistically the right place. So the types of things that we made an adjusting entry just to kind of make it logistically correct, pulling something into the current period, even though it was just recorded in the wrong period, or to just make some formatting logistically correct, such as having the liability as opposed to the receivable. Those things then need to be reversed to take us back to where they should be so that the accounting department can then run properly. Some of the other items, if you're talking about a depreciation journal entry or insurance, you go to the supplies being used up or something like that, those things actually are done, right? Those are permanent type of transactions as opposed to just basically formatting or timing types of transactions. So these ones then we would have to print out too. And again, if we were to provide this to somebody else, if we were the outside CPA firm and we're saying, hey, we made these adjustments in order to do the financials, the compilation, the audit, or the taxes, we would like you to put this into your system. We need to be, a lot of times the CPA firm won't do the reversing entries, because they just trying to make it right as of the cutoff date in order to do what they need to do, and then the client will enter the adjusting entries, and they'll be kind of upset because it throws off their system. So the reversing entries are what we really want to do, to not just complete our job, which is on the adjusting entry side, the tax return or whatever, but also to put the system back into place because it's working logistically well for the client. So we want to make sure they do the reversing entries as well to put it back into place, and that'll hopefully make everybody happy because that's going to make the clean difference between the entering the books during the month and the adjusting entries at the end of the month or year. Therefore, we would have to convince then, if we were an outside CPA firm, asking someone to enter the adjusting entries, to ask them to enter the adjusting entries, and then enter the reversing entries as of the first day of the next month. And so these are the reversing entries. Let's go ahead and print these out. We're going to export to Excel first. We're going to select the Excel dropdown, create the new worksheet, and then we're going to put this to an existing workbook. We're going to find and make sure that that is the correct workbook. So we're going to browse here. We're going to choose this is the correct file, and then we will export. Here we have it. I'm going to then pull this sheet to the right once again. So I'm going to left click on it, pull it to the right. I'm then going to delete this first tab. We don't need that. Right clicking the tab, deleting it. Then we're going to go back to this new sheet that we have set up. I'm going to go to the page layout and then say OK. And then we can see that it's split again. So I'm going to go up top, go to the view up top. We're going to go to the Windows group and unsplit the panes. It now doesn't fit on a page. Therefore, we're going to go to the normal view and do some more formatting for it. I don't need these columns. I'm going to select these columns. I'm holding down Control. This column, this column, this column. We don't need G. We don't need I. We don't need K. We don't need M. We don't need L. O. We don't need R. We don't need. I'm letting go of Control, right-clicking somewhere in the selected area, and then we will delete those columns. Now it actually fits on a page. So this one actually fits on a page. So we could keep this in this format, and you might want to kind of think about, should I keep it in this format or not? Because this one's in the other orientation. So to be in conformity with that, you might want to just make this oriented page layout in landscape as well, because if you print them out, they can both be in landscape, which would probably make it nicer. And so then we're going to go over here. I'm going to call this the reversing entries for March. So we got to enter the reversing entries in March. And you could change the title up here. You could have done this in QuickBooks as well. You could say reversing journal entries. That might make it a little bit easier to understand as well. We could do that here as well and make these adjusting journal entries. That might make it a little bit easier. And then we could think about printing this out into one report. So we can go to the File tab. We can go to the Print options. We can then check it out in terms of the print activity sheet. We want to print the entire workbook and then see if it looks good. We got the balance sheet. We've got the end of the balance sheet with one number on it, and that's okay. We'll keep that, even though it's a little funny looking. And then we've got the profit and loss. We've got then the journal entries, adjusting journal entries. They're on one page. That's fine. And then we got the reversing entries on one page. That's good. Let's go ahead and print this to the Qt PDF printer. We'll say print. It'll be the Qt PDF printer. And we're going to call this, and I'll call it the full name this time, Financial Statements and Adjusting Entries. For February, we're going to say save that. And so there we have it. If we were then to look at what we have, we can say, let's open this up. We have the section 10, and then we have the adjusting entries for February. If we open this back up, we got a pretty clean looking report here. We can give this to somebody, and we should, whoop, that's not the one I want. I want the financial statements. This is the one we want. Double clicking on that, and we get a pretty nice report. We can all send this in one attachment, right? We're getting a lot of kind of documents in one thing. We can send this in one attachment. We got the balance sheet. We got the profit and loss. We've got the adjusting entries, look pretty clean, and then the reversing entries. Closing that back out. We also could then put the other format we could use is to group all this information into a folder. Now again, we're missing one more report, so let's print that last one out. I'm going to print this as a PDF file now. So I'm in the journal for the reversing entry. We're going to go to the print item up top, print the report, and go ahead and print that. And then we will name it. So this is going to be, let's call it the reversing entries for March. And so I'm going to say, okay, save that. So there we have it. And then the other format we can provide these reports then to is to give them one at a time, these 4 reports. We can put them into a separate folder, financial statements for February. And what do we want in there? We want the adjusting entries. We want the balance sheet. We want the profit and loss report. And we want the reversing entries. Now, if I was to look at these, we can give them one at a time to an attachment, or we can go back. We can zip this folder, right-clicking on it. We can send it to, and then a compressed or zipped file. And that way we can attach the entire file to an email, and that'll be a little bit easier, could look cleaner than having multiple or 4 different attachments. So I'm going to go back to the trial balance now, just review our numbers, and then we can push forward. We're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the accounting and taxes, and then the trial balance, changing the dates up top from 01/01/20 to 02/28/20. Let's say 02/29/20. And then you could also provide this report if you so choose to a client as well, the trial balance report, and that might be useful depending, again, on the type of client you have. Are they someone that wants to see debits and credits, or would they rather not see the debits and credits? But you can review these numbers. If they look good, then we'll push forward. If not, then you can take a look at them, use the dates to see if that's going to be the problem, or the auto zoom to zoom in and see the detail to see if you can find the problem. That is great practice. And use the worksheets that we have just made. The journals will help you to determine what those problems are as well. Notice where we have here, as opposed to before when we did the transaction detail report to kind of check our work, we're using the journals here to check our work because we entered all the transactions in the format of journal entries. You could look at the transaction detail report as well. It might be useful to you, but that's why we did the journals here to kind of check your work. Now, if there's anything that's off or you would just like to push forward to the next presentation and you want the data, then we should have backup files. We will have backup files, and maybe not for every presentation, but for many of them so that you can kind of start where you want to start, and we will have the data for you.